It's a black and white movie out of first. And did you ever write it down? If I saw it, I don't know if I did.
Welcome, everyone. Check.
Yeah, you're working.
Welcome, everyone, to the June 15th meeting of the Rotary Club of Des Moines. I'm Matt Musick, your current president. We have a couple of guests who joined us today, so please stand as I say your name. John Kane, CEO of Waldinger Corporation, guest of Steve Jacobs. Thanks for being here today. And then also we have a visiting Rotarian from Omaha, Jerry Ingen. If you could please stand. Here with us from Omaha Rotary Club, Mutual of America Financial Group. Thanks for being here. Happy to have you. All right, it's tumbler time. We ask members who don't have a green dollar sign and a badge to make a $5 contribution and a cup at the table to support the Rotary Club of Des Moines Foundation. Thank you for your support. Where in the world is Matt? Is on hiatus. We're on hiatus, and the reason we're on hiatus is there's a rumor that I needed a break from travel. That's not true, is it, Steve Jacobs? In fact, they're still trying to find me in Egypt.
I'm sorry, you went down the Nile. You're at the bottom of the Nile River.
So remember, anyone who's taking a fun trip, you can check out a flat mat or a flat mat on a stick from Kitty. Take me with you, take a couple of fun photos so that we can share with everybody in the club where you've been. It's a nice way to have a conversation starter, and of course I like to travel. All right, one quick announcement from Dave. On this Saturday at 9 a.m. at the Gold Star Museum at Camp Dodge, we've been there as one of our meetings off-site, there will be a live stream of the commissioning of the USS Iowa, a brand new sub being added to the Navy. So if you would like to participate in that, see Dave Dixon. He'll have the details for you. Randy, if you could please join me at the podium. Randy will lead us through a moment of inspiration, the pledge and the four-way test. And he will be followed by Judy McCoy Davis, who will introduce our guest speaker.
It has nothing to do with anything, but I was inspired yesterday because I passed on the interstate a restored 41 Packard military staff car. I couldn't believe it. And it was only doing 50, so I had to see it, right, to get around it. It was gorgeous. All right, I should sit down now. So our four-way test is influenced by what we think, say, and do. And many of you have young children at home, some new grandparents in the audience in our club, and you get to go torment them a little bit and make them laugh, and just that belly laugh that comes up from young people is so unfiltered and pure that it just makes you want to keep doing it until your son or daughter or somebody else says stop it. But when we're out in public, we also hear children that are being talked to in ways that we wouldn't want to be talked to. And so the basis for those harsh words is anger, and that's kind of my thought for the day. It's okay to be angry, but it needs to be managed. And so I want to break down very quickly the word anger, and maybe this will help you, an associate or yourself, or sometime in the future, or maybe not at all. So A is for attitude. What state of mind are we in when we get angry? Now I know for me, my experiences is it can turn on just like that. I can be coasting along just fine, and something happens, and like, wow. And it's like, I didn't even know that was still in there, right? Where did that come from? So where are we mentally at the time? N is, to me, is to negotiate. Now, do I have to negotiate with myself, with somebody else, with a situation? How do I get around this? Because we know staying angry is not healthy. G is to grow. If I put those first two things together successfully, then I'm going to grow in my personality and my thought process and how I handle it in the future, how I might be able to help somebody else handle theirs in the future. is to evaluate. We do that with all different things and walks of life. And I've learned from this process that I should never knee-jerk a response. And I fight with that to this day. And then R is to redirect our energy to a positive outcome. And if we consider what we think, say, and do, even in an ugly situation, we can work our way through so that it has a positive influence, a positive outcome. And I will leave you with one of my favorite Bible verses, Proverbs 15:1. A soft answer turns away wrath, but a harsh word stirs up anger. And now, Pledge of Allegiance. I pledge allegiance to the flag of the United States of America and to the republic for which it stands, one nation, under God, indivisible, with liberty and justice for all. And the four-way test.
Is
Is there truth? Is it fair to all concerned? Will it build goodwill and better friendships? Will it be beneficial to all concerned? Now meet and greet your fellow lieutenants.
Jordan, good to see you. How are you? Good to see you. Good job, Randy. Thank you, Jay. I'm trying to talk to somebody's place.
I'll let you go
You
now.
guys weren't going to get busy. There you go. Yeah, I think it's hilarious. I love it. John? Yeah, please do. Scott, haven't seen you in at least a day or two.
Good afternoon, everyone. I'm here to introduce our speaker, who is Evelyn Horton. She's the Vice President of Children's Services for Balanced Autism. And if you're like me, that name didn't ring a bell immediately until I realized it's what we formerly knew as Homestead. For 17 years, she's worked there. She was there first and one of the few Iowans to be a behavioral analysis. During that time, Evelyn worked with them to bring behavior analysis to Iowa, working closely with the state to develop standards and procedures to get the changing services to children and families. Today, Balanced Autism functions across the state in 8 different locations, which she'll be telling us more about. Evelyn has served on the Iowa Autism Council, the Regional Autism Program, Autism Society of Iowa, and the Iowa Association of Behavioral Analysts. She's invested in increasing the capacity to provide evidence-based services across Iowa by providing experience in coaching and mentoring students of behavior analysis as they pursue the field of applied behavior analysis. And a little side note about Evelyn that I learned over lunch is that she's originally from Missouri. So, and as we talked about it, she said, you know, I thought if I ever left Missouri, I would go to the mountains or to the ocean. Well, we're happy you instead decided to come to Iowa.
Thank you so much for the opportunity to talk to you this morning, today, lunch. What I should say is thanks for the opportunity to have those lemon bars. The lemon bars are good. You were right, Randy. I want to share with you a bit of the history of Balanced Autism and what we're doing now so that you get the idea of the picture that has changed and where we are currently and going forward from here. So I'm going to start in a bit of a story mode. Now I'm going to stick to my timeline because I made notes, and that will help a lot. Where's this go? There it is. All right. So once upon a time, there was a group of parents of adults with autism that simply did not feel like their adult children were getting what they needed from the residential services that they were currently engaged in. This wasn't necessarily to say that the services they were getting were bad, just that the services weren't adequate for their specific needs based on the fact that they had autism. This was a group of hyper-focused, hyper-vigilant, super advocates, which parents of individuals with autism frequently are, and who just wanted to make sure that their adult children were getting the kinds of services that were specific to autism. They wanted services that were guided by and delivered by people who had expertise specifically in autism. A bit like you want somebody who knows something about plumbing when you go to that section of Lowe's, or you want somebody who's certified and working on your Lexus when you take your Lexus in. They wanted that kind of expertise for their children with autism. And out of that grew the first autism-specific Medicaid provider in Iowa. Our mission was to develop and implement innovative solutions for people with autism. That remains our mission today, almost 28 years later. The first service that we provided, this residential place, sometimes called the farm or sometimes called campus, which is out across from Southeast Polk High School, was designed as a place for adults with autism to live in homes with staff who we had trained in division teach methodologies, crisis intervention. We also developed opportunities there to work on the farm and also the wood shop at that time. It was an innovative approach back in that time, and we literally became known nationwide because of that farm model that we had at that time. At that time, we built 6 houses. Each house still has 4 residents. Until the most recent years, probably within the last 4 years or so, most of the 24 people living on campus were the first 24, were the first people to have that bedroom. They loved it, they didn't want to leave, it fit their need, but that's 24 people. And if you've paid at all attention to the rising rate of autism in the country, we just hit 1 in 36. Let that sink in. It wasn't sufficient, and that part of our services had and still has a very, very long wait list. So it was necessary for us to look at what are the other ways that we can fill the needs. Our board gave us a directive that we should seek to fill needs as we saw them, and that if we weren't doing something that was different and was autism specific, there was no reason for the homestead to exist. We've taken that to heart, and we have since expanded our services in multiple ways and even changed our identity because we no longer fit the picture of what comes to mind when you say a homestead. We have reached across the ages and across the state and even across funders going beyond Medicaid, but we continue to strive to provide autism services in innovative ways. We added what's called home and community-based services, which is done through Medicaid, through waiver. They usually have to qualify, in this case, by having an intellectual disability. We did that both through residential services, so 24-hour care all the way down to hourly care based on what that person needs. This is different than farm campus because farm and campus is called an intermediate care facility where all of their needs come through our funnel to the service provider. In home and community-based service, the idea is that they don't live in what is considered to be an institutional setting. These are your neighbors, people who may live down the street. You may call it a group home, so there may be more than one person with a disability. In our case, it would be people with autism living together who are getting support services, still from Balance Autism, but in a more integrated way. Now, we have always integrated our ICF ID program, way more than a lot have. If you look at other agencies, what you might see is something that looks much more like a nursing home, or for the big picture, look at Woodward or Glenwood as ICFs as well. So we started, we knew that the 24 beds weren't enough, and we went into home and community-based services. We started providing residential services, hourly services, skill building with adults at that point, and we found that there were children who needed services. We really started to get pressure to do a residential facility for children, and we resisted for some time. We did go in with a heavy skill-based hourly waiver service, home and community-based services, that has been very, very effective across the state, and was the service that we had for children when I first came here. We sort of sadly also discovered that there really were kids that, while we could provide services that would probably keep a majority of kids out of the need for institutional or even residential care, there were some who that wasn't the case. And there were some who the families weren't making it, and kids weren't in a good place because of it. And with a bit of resistance probably, we opened a duplex and opened 8 more beds under the ICF title for children. It is really hard in Iowa to get residential care for children. And so we are limited to those 8. We found out that those children would most likely still need continuing residential care, and so as they age out of the children's home, they usually are able to go into community setting, HCBS, so a little less intensive than if they went to the farm. Since that time, we've developed supported employment services. We currently have 41 people who are actively employed, getting a paycheck and getting support from us in doing that. And that doesn't count the ones who graduated from supported employment and are now independently employed without any assistance for us. That's been a bit of a struggle for a couple of years to get up and running, especially through the pandemic. We still look for employers who are willing to work alongside us to modify what that job will be so that we can make a good fit. And in these times, when almost every business has a help wanted sign, it makes sense that we partner to get this highly underemployed group of people to work where we can get them to work. So I'm just telling you, there's a resource out there, and there's a company, more than one actually, who's willing to come alongside you and help you figure out how do you put these people to work as well. So we have an issue with ICF, and that is that the state limited the number of beds that are available in the state of Iowa for people to be in an intermediate care facility like we have out on campus. So we can't just grow that program. The goal there was to reduce institutionalization. And you may or may not be aware of all of the hullabaloo that has gone on in the past couple of years with our 2 large state agencies, Woodward and Glenwood, being found by the Department of Justice to be problematic in that they're keeping people way too long. They want them to be moved back into their local communities. But to do that, it really means that Iowa's going to have to step up to getting services in the more rural areas outside of Des Moines that can support people besides just in the Des Moines area. So we have also, because of that, we have really grown our residential services and home and community-based services. We currently have 14 homes around the Des Moines area, Ankeny, Pleasant Hill included, who have individuals with autism who live together in what you would call group homes and get 24-hour care services from us. It used to be that if somebody was more severely challenged, required a lot more intensive services, that they would be in an ICF, but the ICFs are full. So we end up with some super challenging behaviors going on in residential facilities that could mean that the landlord can evict them. We found that the places that were most likely to be rented by 3 adult males with autism frequently ended up being in the lower socioeconomic parts of town, and often ended up with landlords who were tired of doing repairs and stopped doing them, who didn't do good maintenance, who we ended up with infestations. It just wasn't good living. And how hard, we were talking earlier about how hard it is for a parent to make a decision to put their child, adult or young, in a residential facility. Well, what if the place looks awful? Our answer a couple of years ago, innovative solution here, was to move from 3 in a house to 4 in a house and buy the houses ourselves. So with 4, we bought new 4-bedroom homes. We started with 4, we now have 12. We're in the process of buying 3 more. Some of that has been with additional funds that we received through the ARPA dollars that have come through. We were specific in picking areas where those homes could be fairly close together, so sort of clustered, not next door neighbors, but within a mile or 2, there might be 3 houses. By doing that, we were able to put 2 staff instead of 1 at that home. And that means that if Joey wants to go to Walmart, there's somebody who can take him and who may call the house down the road or a couple blocks over and say, I'm going to Walmart, does anybody else want to go? And there's still somebody at home with the ones who don't want to go. Previously, well, I say previously, we do still have some people who do not live in homes we own. That's fine. It's mostly because we don't own enough homes. They're eager when we get another home to move into that. But that means that if there's 1 staff and 3 people, they either all go or none of them go. And if we really want to look at people being part of the community, this was a big step for us. And it was a bit of a risk, but we think it was an important risk to take, and we're really pleased with the outcomes that we've had on it. We also developed a lot more expertise in effective interventions for people with autism. And as we dove into it, we could not ignore the science that says that applied behavior analysis provides us with the most effective, research-based ways to teach things. So why would we do anything else? Well, guess what? Iowa didn't want to pay for applied behavior analysis. We'll pay for astronaut therapy. We battled that, and now there are applied behavior analysis centers, businesses besides ours, all over the state of Iowa. But I'm really proud of the fact that we led the way in that, and I still believe that we hold a standard that is exceptionally high. And while we have definitely our work cut out now to become the provider of choice, since there are other choices as well, we are finding that we are frequently the provider of choice. So the homestead had already developed some staff who were interested in ABA, and that's when I came into the picture as the first behavior analyst that the homestead had. And we currently have 35 behavior analysts out of just under 200 in the whole state. So for the company, for us to, we've grown them. And actually when you look at many of the other companies, they have we've grown their people too. So we're proud of the fact that we've built a capacity for applied behavior analysis in the state that wasn't here before, but we also know that we still have lots and lots of work to do. We can skip ahead through several of the stages that included convincing the state to fund this service, struggling to find more BCBAs, and so instead raising up our own, designing the first clinic model, championing legislative changes that assured funding through both Medicaid and insurance, and the many other ways that we really hung our hat on the idea of being innovative. As the model developed, our board quickly saw this was a huge need, not just in Des Moines, and frankly, sooner than I was ready, we began to replicate into other parts of the state. 5 years ago, we decided that our brand no longer needed to be more reflective of who we had become. The 24 on campus living on a homestead was not a picture that described who we really were at that time. It was a real struggle to change our name, because especially in the Des Moines area where we didn't have to advertise in Des Moines, people in Des Moines knew who the homestead was as it related to autism services. But we spent about a year working through the process, and what we figured out was that what we really do is we balance science with imagination, evidence with creativity, and research with compassion in order to teach people with autism. And where they live has nothing to do with it. And that's why we're Balance Autism. We think it is a balance between many things. How do we balance the need for support and the need for independence? The word balance has just carried so much weight with us as we've made decisions going forward. We're currently employing about 400 staff, 35 of which are BCBAs, and I have not counted the number of children and adults whose lives we've touched in the 27, almost 28 years, but just this past year, we touched over 550. So for them, some of those, it's truly life-changing, and because of that, I have a few minutes, Anne McFarland, who's on our board, asked me to share a story that she heard me tell back in February when the board was together. So I'll go back into storytelling mode on this. Out of our locations, we did Des Moines first, and the 2 locations in Des Moines, Altoona and Clyde. Then we went to Cedar Rapids, Quad Cities, Cedar Falls, Burlington, Iowa City, and most recently, we went to the Omaha Council Bluffs area. We have done something different there, and then what we normally do is a clinic-based service that still has it still has a heavy dose of parent training. It still has a heavy dose of how do we help you be okay about participating in gymnastics or the running club or whatever. So it's not all center-based. But in Omaha, Council Bluffs area, we only opened with in-home services. So there is no clinic there. It is our hope that we will do that in about a year so that we'll actually open a clinic. So this is particularly a child who is in the Omaha Council Bluffs area. We did an intake on him when he was just over 8 years old a year ago. He demonstrated self-injurious behavior, destruction, aggressive behaviors. During assessment, he did not show any basic communication skills. At that time, he wasn't attending school. He actually wasn't really going anywhere. One of the major reasons was because he refused to wear clothes. An 8-year-old who's naked is a little bit difficult to handle at school. He preferred to stay home where he could be naked and where he basically could place whatever demands he wanted and get by with them. Additional factors included that the home conditions were not very sanitary. He is also not potty trained, was also not potty trained. And his only parent is an extremely obese person who is very reclusive and has chosen not to leave the home, had chosen not to leave the home. She had stated to us that she really didn't mind if the rest of their life were spent together at home. She would be fine with that. The problem was he was hurting her, and he was hurting her pretty seriously, and she realized he was getting bigger. He's only 8 now. What happens when he's 12? What about when he's 20? I really can't do this, can I? But she was pretty hesitant, and the truth is she was pretty resistant. She had a lot of reasons why this won't work, but she knew desperately that she needed help. So even as we started to work on a plan to intake him, she told us, he's never gonna let you come in the house, and he doesn't leave the house, so I don't know how you're gonna do this. And he will push you out the door, he will hurt you, his self-injurious behavior will just increase. I don't know how you're gonna be able to do this. But she still opened the door and let us come in anyway, because she was desperate. So our staff began working with him in the home with a variety of programs to teach him to ask for what he wanted. It's one of the things we've learned. If you just give people the way to communicate, starting with asking for the things they want and it works, the need for problem behavior is reduced immediately. Sorry. So we began with communication, and we also used a lot of reinforcement for communication. If you ask for it, you get it, was the first piece. So he actually liked us being there. He really liked this particular staff, and he wanted her attention. So it was real easy to very quickly go into, I only give you attention when you have a towel covering your genitals. So we went from a towel to eventually other ways of covering up and removing attention whenever he would remove the towel or the blanket. Fortunately, our veteran staff was fine with the idea of a shaping program that meant that if we can get it for 15 minutes, that's huge. Once we get to 20 minutes, that's even better. And she was totally pumped by the progress that she was seeing. So she worked the shaping program while she was also teaching him to communicate and to stay covered up, and he began to tolerate it. We had served him for just over a year with some breaks in service because we lost staff and had to have some action plans also at times because of the unsanitary conditions of the home. There were times that we literally, you can guess this is a lot of fun, to say to a mom, we can't come back in until you get this cleaned up this much. Staff have to have a place to sit where they don't have to worry about what they're sitting in, etc. And by that point, Mom was a believer, and she began to follow along with it. So he made progress. He now uses what's called a picture exchange communication system, which means that he has a whole book of pictures and he has to engage a communicative partner to use these pictures to communicate with, which is way better way to start than pushing buttons on a voice output because you don't have to get anybody's attention that way. He has been able to, he now pays attention to when people call his name. He's become more social, he initiates interactions with others, and he's built a bigger repertoire of play skills, more similar to children his own age, which includes social games, coloring, painting. He worked on tolerating adult-directed activities. That was a big deal for him. He had not been told what to do the whole time that he'd been staying home with Mom. During this year, he made gains in replacing several of his problem behaviors with functional communication. He increased his ability to wait for something. He increased his ability to accept somebody saying no, and he increased his tolerance of work tasks. So what about his nakedness? With regressions occurring whenever new staff were introduced, the program moved to him actually wearing clothes, at least on the bottom half, and expecting that when he was not clothed, he was covered up with a blanket. In mid-December, we began working on him tolerating a large shirt being put on, and in early January, because his relationship with the staff was so great, we were able to have her put his shirt back on him right away when he took it off. He went from removing it 15 times the first day which is a half day actually, to averaging once, and that would be when he was taken to the bathroom. We then worked on him tolerating the presence of a pull-up. On baseline, it resulted in him hitting his head with his fist, repeatedly handing us the pull-up and pointing to across the room like, leave, get that thing away from me. We worked on tolerating the pull-up. Again, it was another shaping procedure. First it needed to be over on the arm of the chair, then it could be on the staff's lap, and then it could be even closer to him until one day he spontaneously picked up the pull-up, handed it to staff, and stuck out his foot. Pretty cool. She helped him put it on. He then went to his picture exchange communication system and requested his pants and his shoes. And then they went for a car ride. The next day, he chose to dress again. And this time, the behavior analyst and the parent took him to the grocery store for the first time since COVID. Years. We worked carefully with his parent during parent training to have him wear a shirt during the parent training portion, which was being conducted through Zoom. After 2 weeks of him wearing his shirt all the time, the school indicated they thought that they were interested in bringing him back to school. So we went to work with the school. It took a lot of time building relationships, partly between the parent and the school. Trust had been lost on both cases. In order to make that transition, multiple meetings occurred. The parent actually became more confident, and I think partly because they saw that we trusted and we were confident in the school's ability to handle him. So when we met back in February, it happened to be the day after our BCBA met with the school to work on the details of the role, and the day that I shared this with Ann was the day that the email came to me saying he goes to school today. We changed our program to be a morning program that would include his preparation for school, that we would use parent training to teach the parent how to get him on the bus for school, as well as continue to do the school collaboration. He's still going to school, Ann. We've had a few hiccups along the line, but none of them have been so devastating that he's not in school anymore. When you think down the road at where this kid would have ended up without intervention, while I'm telling you we served 550 people this last year, it still is a drop in the bucket compared to what is needed. But everyone that ends up with these kinds of results has a totally different future than they would have had if we hadn't been able to intervene. So we're super proud of the fact that the state has let us do it and that we forged a way to do it. I need to stop so that you can ask a few questions before I hand the microphone back. And then Ann's gonna tell Steve that I quit on time, right? Questions? Yes?
You mentioned 1 in 34. What are some causal factors for the increase in the numbers of people with autism?
The question has to do with this increasing rate, what do we think is causing autism? We think it is multiple things. We actually think that when it is all teased out, there will probably be multiple things that are called autism, that maybe there are subtypes, etc. So some portion of it can definitely be said to be because we do a better job of diagnosing, but that doesn't cover the whole thing. So we do believe that there is a genetic component that predisposes somebody for autism, and a variety then of biological things that could actually be the kickers. Kind of like alcoholism may have a genetic component, but if you never drink, you'll never have alcoholism. So we kind of think that's where it is. It's still a bunch of questions, because we diagnose autism by the way it looks. There is no medical test other than observation for diagnosing autism. Yes?
Is the state of Iowa your primary funding force?
We used to be solely Medicaid, and we still are almost completely Medicaid for adult services, children's services, because we helped move the insurance to include covering applied behavior analysis services. Medicaid, probably 75% of our kids are still on Medicaid, but insurance is the first payer and Medicaid is the secondary payer. So it reduced state of Iowa expenses to some degree, burdened, carried by insurance, by private insurance. Yes?
Can you just describe more about behavior analysis?
Yeah, it's almost as hard, I'm sorry, he asked for a description of what is applied behavior analysis. It is a science. We have decades of research behind it, but the research is done on very intricate parts, like what is the, when should I use video modeling? And if I use video modeling, should it be video modeling where the person sees it from their perspective or from somebody else's perspective? So that's kind of where the crux of the research comes from. The whole big picture of applied behavior analysis is that we take a skill or a behavior and break it down into parts and then figure out how to teach those specific parts, how to address those specific parts. And it usually is through a series of both reinforcers and, I hate to use the word punishers because you might think that that means smacking people, but it doesn't. All right, thank you.
Thank you. Thank you, Evelyn. Thank you for sharing your time with us today and your informative program. And thank you most of all for the work you do. That is not easy work. As a token of our appreciation, we're giving a book in your honor to the Des Moines Public Library. Your book will become part of the Rotary Rosie Reader Band Collection. This is a traveling library that has reached hundreds of readers across Des Moines since 2020, when our club donated the money to purchase it. So happy to have that be part of the collections. Okay, as you consider the following upcoming meetings, please think about who you know would be an outstanding addition to our club and bring him or her. Remember, RSVPs have to be into Kitty by Wednesday morning at 9 a.m. You cannot sign, I always forget to say this, but if you're bringing a guest, make sure you go directly through Kitty, not online. We will be, Doug Bickford from Alzheimer's Association will be here next Thursday, June 22. On the 29th, we'll have both the passing of the gavel and First Lieutenant Tony Dormus from Civil Air Patrol. And on July 6th, we'll be celebrating July 4th. So no meeting on the 6th. Thank you, John, for being here today. Thank you, Jerry, for being here today. And I'd like to extend a warm, happy Father's Day weekend to all of you fathers out there. We'll see you next week. We are adjourned.